The low hum of quantum stabilizers filled the cavernous testing chamber, a sound that Dr. Elena Rodriguez had come to both love and fear. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, tracing quantum equations that would have driven lesser minds to madness. The Whisper Drive prototype, a sleek, obsidian black vessel no larger than an old-world shuttle, sat suspended in a web of electromagnetic fields, looking less like a spacecraft and more like a predatory creature waiting to strike. "Final systems check," Elena muttered, her voice barely audible over the low thrum of machinery. Her team, a motley collection of the world's most brilliant and borderline insane quantum physicists, watched from the reinforced observation deck. Dr. Marcus Chen, her longtime rival and closest collaborator, leaned forward, his breath fogging the transparent alloy window. "This is suicide, Elena," he whispered, though his eyes betrayed a mixture of terror and unbridled excitement. The two test pilots, Captain Arya Novak and Lieutenant Jack Reyes, sat strapped into the vessel's compact cockpit. They were more than just pilots, they were test subjects. Volunteers who understood that this mission could either rewrite human understanding of physics or end their lives in a spectacular quantum implosion. Elena's communication implant chirped. The direct neural link buzzed with anticipation, feeding her a constant stream of data from the ship's experimental quantum sensors. "Whisper Drive initialization sequence beginning," she announced, her voice calm despite the hurricane of possibilities raging in her mind. The chamber's temperature dropped precipitously. Quantum entanglement generators spun up, creating a localized field that seemed to make reality itself wobble and blur. Captain Novak's voice crackled through the comm system, steady but with an undercurrent of something. Excitement. Fear. Quantum harmonics stabilizing. Preparing for first quantum jump. Marcus Chen's hand unconsciously gripped the edge of the control panel. The entire scientific community, no, the entire human civilization, was watching. This wasn't just another test flight. This was humanity's first true attempt to break the fundamental laws of physics that had constrained space travel for centuries. The Whisper Drive was different from anything humanity had ever conceived. While traditional faster-than-light theories relied on warp fields, wormholes, or quantum tunneling, this technology was something else entirely. It didn't just move through space. It folded space, twisted it, rewrote its very fundamental properties. "Jump sequence initiated," Elena reported, her neural implant flooding her consciousness with cascading data streams. The ship began to shimmer, its edges becoming indistinct. For a moment, it seemed to exist in multiple places simultaneously, a quantum superposition that defied classical understanding. Then, everything went wrong. The ship didn't just jump, it unfolded, fractalized, became something that was simultaneously present and absent. The quantum sensors went haywire, spewing data that made no sense, coordinates that didn't exist, temporal readings that suggested the ship was in multiple time periods at once. "Abort! Abort sequence!" Marcus shouted, but it was too late. In the next instant, the Whisper Drive vanished. Silence. Then, exactly 3.7 seconds later, it reappeared. But something was different. The ship's exterior was unchanged, its sleek obsidian surface unmarked. But the moment the airlock opened, Elena knew something fundamental had shifted. Captain Novak emerged first, her movements precise, but off. Her eyes seemed to focus on something just beyond the visible spectrum, darting to locations that didn't exist. "Status report," Elena demanded, her voice professional despite the growing sense of wrongness. Novak turned, and for a brief moment, her eyes reflected something impossible. Star systems that had never been charted, landscapes that defied Euclidean geometry. When she spoke, her voice carried an echo, as if multiple versions of herself were speaking simultaneously. "We went somewhere," Novak said, her words carefully chosen. "Somewhere between." Lieutenant Rice followed, his condition even more disturbing. He was sketching something on a portable tablet, star charts that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, coordinates that shifted and changed even as he drew them. The first test of the Whisper Drive was complete. But as Elena would soon discover, they hadn't just traveled faster than light. They had touched something that was never meant to be touched. Zarakil's tentacular appendages trembled as she received the transmission. The holographic display in her private chamber at the Galactic Confederacy's Central Intelligence Hub flickered with data that defied comprehension. Her species, the Vornax, had catalogued thousands of alien civilizations over millennia. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for this. The human transmission was innocuous at first glance. Technical specifications, preliminary quantum drive data, standard first contact protocol documentation. But something was fundamentally wrong. With each microsecond of data processing, Zarakil felt her carefully constructed mental barriers begin to dissolve. "Impossible," she whispered, her universal translator struggling to convey the depth of her psychological distress. The transmission wasn't just information, it was alive. Vornax neurobiology was designed to process and categorize vast amounts of complex data. Their entire civilization was built on the principle of absolute information control. But this human technology, this whispered drive, was something else entirely. Each byte of data seemed to carry a psychological payload, a quantum resonance that burrowed deep into the fabric of conscious experience. Across the Galactic Confederacy's communication networks, similar scenes were unfolding. Synapsychologists, data analysts, and diplomatic communication specialists began reporting inexplicable phenomena. Some spoke of sudden, vivid hallucinations. Others described experiencing memories that were not their own. Childhood scenes from Earth, fragmented moments of human experience that seemed to leak through the digital transmission. In the high-security communication hub, Zarakil's senior colleagues began to panic. Ambassador Korex, a crusty veteran of 1,000 diplomatic encounters, suddenly collapsed. Surveillance footage showed him muttering in perfect English about a baseball game he had never attended, describing the smell of hot dogs and the sound of a crowd cheering, memories that were distinctly, undeniably human. "Quarantine the transmission," ordered Central Command. But it was too late. The data had already spread. Back on Earth, Dr. Elena Rodriguez was deep in analysis of the Whisper Drive's first test. The pilots, Captain Novak and Lieutenant Reyes, were undergoing extensive psychological evaluations. Initial scans were bizarre. Their brain patterns showed quantum entanglement that should have been impossible. Novak could accurately predict astronomical events moments before they occurred. Reyes had begun speaking in mathematical languages that no human had ever conceived. "This is more than a drive," Elena muttered, studying the brain scans. "This is a communication device we don't understand." The military saw things differently. General Marcus Hawthorne, a hardline strategist with zero patience for theoretical physics, saw only potential. "If this technology can do what the preliminary reports suggest," he told his war council, "we're looking at the most powerful psychological warfare tool in human history." But the true nature of the Whisper Drive was far more complex. In the Galactic Confederacy's most secure communication center, Zarakil made a discovery that would change everything. The human transmission wasn't just transferring data. It was creating quantum bridges between consciousness itself. Alien researchers began experiencing shared hallucinations. A Trilarian xenobiologist suddenly found himself experiencing the memory of a human child's first bicycle ride. A Keshar diplomatic analyst wept, overwhelmed by the raw emotional memory of a human wedding, a memory that was not his own. The Whisper Drive was doing something unprecedented. It wasn't just traveling faster than light. It was traveling through consciousness. Zarakil understood the first, terrifying implication. Humanity had created a technology that could potentially merge entire species' psychological landscapes. The boundaries between individual consciousness, something every advanced civilization considered sacred and immutable, were becoming permeable. "We are no longer separate," She recorded in her final report before being quarantined. Humanity has discovered something beyond technology. They have found a way to communicate that makes our entire understanding of communication obsolete. As the first quantum ripples spread across the galaxy, one thing became terrifyingly clear. Humanity had changed the rules of engagement forever. And no one, not a single alien civilization, was prepared for what would come next. The first signs of the cascade came quietly, almost imperceptibly. Global communication networks began to glitch in ways that defied traditional diagnostic protocols. At the European Quantum Research Center in Geneva, senior systems analyst Dr. Helmut Weber watched in growing horror as communication patterns began to exhibit impossible characteristics. Alien diplomatic channels experienced the first wave of interference. It wasn't a technical malfunction. It was something far more profound. A Cretacean communication relay suddenly began broadcasting fragments of human memories. Random snippets burst through. A child's laughter from a suburban backyard, the distant sound of a baseball game, the smell of fresh bread from a New York bakery. These weren't transmissions. They were psychological echoes. Dr. Elena Rodriguez understood first. The whisper drive wasn't just a transportation technology. It was creating quantum tunnels through consciousness itself. It's a resonance cascade, she told her team, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed increasingly bizarre data patterns. Each activation of the drive doesn't just move through space. It rewrites the psychological landscape around it. The test pilots from the first mission, Captain Aria Novak and Lieutenant Jack Reyes, had become the epicenter of the phenomenon. Their neural patterns had transformed into something unprecedented. Medical scans showed their brains operating in quantum states that should have been impossible, creating neural networks that bridged impossible distances. Novak could now predict astronomical events with terrifying accuracy. During one monitoring session, she described a solar flare in the Andromeda galaxy moments before it occurred, providing coordinates and intensity levels that would be confirmed weeks later by deep space monitoring systems. Reyes developed an even more disturbing ability. He began speaking in mathematical languages that no human or alien had ever conceived. His communications were living equations, mathematical constructs that seemed to breathe with their own form of consciousness. We're not just observing a technological breakthrough, Dr. Rodriguez realized. We're witnessing the birth of a new form of communication. Across the galaxy, alien research stations began experiencing collective hallucinations. The Vornak Psychological Research Complex reported entire teams experiencing shared consciousness events. Researchers would simultaneously sketch identical star charts they'd never seen, speak in languages they'd never learned, experience memories that were not their own. General Marcus Hawthorne saw the military potential immediately. This isn't just a drive, he told the United Earth Defense Council. This is a weapon that makes nuclear technology look like a children's toy. But the true horror was only beginning. The whisper drive's quantum resonance began to create what the scientific community would later call psychological contamination zones. Entire regions of space became areas of intense quantum entanglement. Ships passing through these zones would emerge fundamentally changed, their crews experiencing memories, emotions, and cognitive patterns that were not their original experiences. A Trilarian exploration vessel disappeared while traversing one such zone. When it reappeared weeks later, the entire crew spoke fluent English and carried memories of growing up in different Earth cities. They remembered childhoods they had never lived, complete with intricate details of family histories, school experiences, and personal traumas. Dr. Rodriguez's team discovered the most terrifying aspect of the resonance cascade. The whisper drive wasn't just moving through space, it was mapping consciousness itself. Each activation created a quantum network that connected not just individual minds, but entire species' collective unconscious. We're creating a living, breathing communication network, she told her increasingly worried colleagues. But we have no idea what might be communicating back. The Galactic Confederacy's emergency communication channels buzzed with increasing panic. Diplomatic representatives began experiencing spontaneous empathy events, feeling the exact emotions of their counterparts, regardless of species or physiological differences. An emergency session of the Confederacy's High Council dissolved into chaos when representatives suddenly found themselves experiencing each other's most intimate memories and emotions. Cultural barriers, carefully maintained for millennia, began to dissolve. Humanity had done more than create a faster-than-light drive. They had discovered a way to fundamentally rewrite the rules of communication, consciousness, and existence itself. And no one, not a single civilization in the galaxy, was prepared for what would come next. The Galactic Confederacy's emergency session would forever be remembered as the day interstellar diplomacy collapsed. It began normally enough, or as normally as a gathering of 27 alien species could be. Holographic representatives from across the known galaxy materialized in the massive crystal-domed conference chamber on Nexus Prime, the Confederacy's neutral administrative hub. Ambassador Zarakil of the Vornax delegation was the first to feel it. A subtle vibration, almost imperceptible, began to resonate through her neural pathways. Her tentacular appendages twitched involuntarily, a response that would have been considered embarrassingly undignified in any other context. The Kritax representative, a crystalline being named Shirak, was next. Mid-sentence, discussing trade regulations, he suddenly stopped. His translucent form began to shimmer, and then, impossibly, he started speaking fluent English. "I remember my 10th birthday," Shirak said, his crystalline structure pulsing with an alien approximation of confusion. "There was a red bicycle. My father. No, not my father. A human father. James. He wore a blue shirt with a coffee stain." Silence swept through the chamber. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the live feed from Earth's Diplomatic Monitoring Center, her breath catching in her throat. The whisper drive's psychological resonance was no longer a theoretical concept. It was happening in real time. General Marcus Hawthorne leaned forward, his cybernetic eye scanning the diplomatic feed. "This is beyond anything we predicted," he muttered to Rodriguez. On the holographic display, diplomatic chaos erupted. The Trilarian ambassador began weeping, not with the controlled biochemical response typical of her species, but with raw, human-like emotion. She was experiencing a memory of a human wedding, feeling the joy, the pain, the complex emotional tapestry of a life she had never lived. "The quantum bridges are expanding," Rodriguez explained to Hawthorne, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "The whisper drive isn't just transferring information. It's creating psychological tunnels between consciousness." The conference descended into pandemonium. Alien representatives found themselves sharing memories, experiencing emotions from species they had never encountered. Cultural barriers, meticulously maintained for millennia, began to dissolve like tissue paper in a rainstorm. A Shkar diplomatic analyst suddenly stood, his tentacles writhing with an unprecedented emotional response. "I understand now," he proclaimed, his voice carrying multiple emotional layers. "The human experience. The complexity. He stopped, overwhelmed. Rodriguez knew what was happening. The whisper drive was doing more than just transferring data. It was creating a living, breathing network of consciousness that transcended traditional communication barriers. "It's a communication technology," she explained to Hawthorne, "but not like anything we've ever conceived. We're not just sharing information. We're sharing experience." The Galactic Confederacy's communication protocols began to break down. Diplomatic encryption became meaningless when entire species could suddenly understand each other's most intimate experiences. Cultural misunderstandings that had sparked wars for millennia suddenly seemed trivial. Zarakil, fighting against the psychological invasion, managed to activate an emergency communication channel. Her message was both a warning and a plea. Humanity has discovered something beyond technology. We are no longer separate. The boundaries between species are becoming permeable. General Hawthorne watched the diplomatic meltdown with a mixture of horror and fascination. "They're not just sharing memories," he realized. They're merging consciousness. The human team monitoring the feed understood the profound implications. The whisper drive was transforming diplomacy, communication, and potentially consciousness itself. No alien species was prepared for this level of psychological exposure. In the conference chamber, ambassadors from different species began to speak in a new language, part mathematical equation, part emotional experience, part something entirely unclassifiable. Traditional communication had become obsolete. Rodriguez turned to Hawthorne, her eyes reflecting the magnitude of the moment. "We didn't just create a faster-than-light drive," she said quietly. "We've created a way to fundamentally understand each other." The diplomatic session continued, but nothing would ever be the same. Humanity had rewritten the rules of communication, and the galaxy would never recover. And this was just the beginning. The first weaponized demonstration of the Whisper Drive came without a single shot fired. Deep within the United Earth Defense Complex, Colonel Arya Novak, transformed by the first quantum jump, stood before a holographic war council. Her eyes moved in patterns that suggested she was seeing far more than the room around her, tracking coordinates and possibilities that existed beyond normal perception. "It's not about destruction," she explained, her voice carrying an unsettling resonance. "It's about total psychological dominance." The military strategists leaned forward, equal parts terrified and fascinated. The Kritax invasion fleet had been positioning itself near the outer colonies, preparing for what they believed would be a standard territorial expansion. They had conquered countless civilizations, their military might unquestioned for millennia. Their battleships, each the size of small moons, represented the pinnacle of alien military technology. They never stood a chance. A single Whisper drive-equipped scout ship approached the fleet. No weapons charge, no defensive systems activated, just passive approach. And then, everything changed. The Kritax warships began to experience collective hallucinations. Every single crew member simultaneously experienced the most terrifying memories of their species' historic defeats, quantum entangled with raw human emotional experiences of resistance, hope, and unbreakable spirit. Entire battleship crews found themselves reliving human resistance movements. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the French Resistance, the anti-colonial struggles across Earth's history. They experienced the visceral determination of humans who refused to break, who fought despite impossible odds. The psychological assault was total and instantaneous. Kritax military discipline, built over tens of thousands of years, dissolved in moments. Warship commanders began to weep, overwhelmed by shared memories of human resilience. Tactical officers experienced complete psychological breakdown, their collective consciousness flooded with emotions and experiences they could not comprehend. "We're not destroying them," Dr. Elena Rodriguez explained to the stunned military council. "We're fundamentally altering their psychological capacity to wage war." General Marcus Hawthorne understood immediately. This was beyond traditional warfare. This was something entirely new. The Whisper Drive had become a weapon that didn't kill. It fundamentally transformed the enemy's ability to even conceptualize conflict. Subsequent analysis showed that the Kritax fleet didn't just retreat. They completely disbanded their military structure. Entire military academies were shut down. A civilization built on conquest suddenly lost its fundamental drive for expansion, all without a single human life put at risk. Dr. Rodriguez's team continued to unlock the drive's capabilities. The test pilots, Novak and Rice, had become something more than human. Their neural networks existed in quantum states that defied traditional understanding of consciousness. Novak could now predict military movements with terrifying accuracy, not through traditional intelligence gathering, but by existing in a state of quantum probability. She could simultaneously experience multiple potential future conflict scenarios, selecting the most optimal path. Rice developed an even more profound ability. He could communicate in pure mathematical constructs, languages so complex that they were essentially living equations. Military strategists found that his communication patterns could instantaneously develop defensive and offensive strategies that were generations beyond current thinking. The Galactic Confederacy watched in growing terror. Humanity had not just created a faster-than-light drive. They had discovered a method of warfare that made traditional military might look like children playing with sticks. No weapons were fired. No traditional military force was deployed. Entire civilizations could be fundamentally transformed through psychological resonance. Colonel Novak turned to the War Council, her eyes reflecting star systems that didn't exist in any known galactic map. "We're not conquerors," she said quietly. "We're architects of consciousness." The military strategists realized the truth. Humanity had become something more than a species. They had become a fundamental force of psychological transformation. And the galaxy would never be the same. The underground research facility beneath the Atacama Desert was unlike any scientific installation in human history. Here, Dr. Elena Rodriguez and her team were no longer just scientists. They were explorers of consciousness itself. The walls of the primary research chamber pulsed with holographic data streams that defied traditional understanding. Quantum entanglement sensors, designed by Lieutenant Jack Reyes, created mathematical visualizations that looked more like living, breathing organisms than scientific readouts. "We're not just studying the drive," Rodriguez explained to the select group of military and scientific advisors. "We're studying consciousness as a fundamental force of the universe." Captain Aria Novak stood at the center of the facility, her body seemingly existing in multiple quantum states simultaneously. Sensors showed her neural patterns bridging impossible distances, creating cognitive maps that extended far beyond human, or any known alien, perception. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. During a routine analysis of the Whisper Drive's quantum signature, Reyes discovered something impossible. The drive wasn't just moving through space. It was creating micro-dimensional resonances that interacted with neural networks in ways that fundamentally challenged everything known about consciousness, communication, and existence. "It's a language," Reyes said, his eyes reflecting complex mathematical patterns. "Not a human language. Not an alien language. A fundamental language of existence itself." The military advisors shifted uncomfortably. General Marcus Hawthorne leaned forward, his cybernetic eye scanning the data with inhuman precision. "Explain," he demanded. Reyes projected a holographic representation that was part mathematical equation, part living organism. "The Whisper Drive doesn't just move through space. It creates quantum bridges between consciousness. We're not just traveling. We're communicating in a language more fundamental than words, more complex than mathematics." Rodriguez pulled up additional data. The drive's quantum signature was creating what they dubbed consciousness tunnels, pathways that could potentially connect minds across unimaginable distances, not just transmitting information, but creating living bridges of experience and understanding. "We've discovered something beyond technology," she explained. "We're mapping the fundamental infrastructure of consciousness itself." The military saw potential weapons. The scientists saw something far more profound. Lieutenant Reyes demonstrated the most extreme manifestation. He began to speak, if speak was even the right word. His communication was a living mathematical construct, a language that was simultaneously an equation, an emotion, and a method of travel. "Imagine," he said, his voice carrying multiple layers of meaning, "communicating an entire life experience in a single quantum moment. Not through words, not through images, but through the fundamental language of existence." The facility's sensors began to go wild. Reyes was creating quantum bridges that extended beyond known space, touching realms of consciousness that no being had ever experienced. Captain Novak approached a specially designed quantum interface. Her mind, now existing in multiple quantum states, began to map impossible coordinates. She could simultaneously experience multiple potential futures, track astronomical events before they occurred, and communicate in ways that made traditional language look primitive. "We're not just a species anymore," Novak said quietly. We're becoming something else entirely. The breakthrough came with a terrifying realization. The Whisper Drive wasn't just a transportation technology. It was a method of fundamental communication that could potentially connect, or completely overwhelm, entire species consciousness. General Hawthorne understood the military implications immediately. "This isn't a weapon," he said, a rare moment of philosophical reflection, breaking through his tactical mindset. "This is a complete reimagining of existence." Rodriguez nodded. "We're not just traveling faster than light. We're creating bridges between consciousness itself, between what is and what could be." The facility fell silent. The implications were both beautiful and terrifying. Humanity had discovered something beyond technology. They had found a way to communicate that made every previous method of understanding look like children passing notes in a primitive classroom. And this was just the beginning. The Galactic Confederacy's emergency session looked more like a collective psychological breakdown than a diplomatic meeting. Entire alien civilizations were restructuring themselves in response to humanity's quantum breakthrough. The Kritax, once a militaristic species of absolute conquest, had completely dismantled their war academies. Trilarian research institutions were being rebuilt from the ground up, their entire scientific methodology challenged by the implications of the Whisper Drive. Ambassador Zarakil of the Vornax stood at the center of the chaos, her tentacular appendages mapping out increasingly complex quantum communication patterns. She had become something more than a diplomat, a living bridge between species and consciousness. "Quarantine is insufficient," she declared, her voice carrying multiple layers of meaning. "Humanity has discovered a method of communication that makes our entire understanding of existence obsolete." The holographic displays showed the cascading effects. Alien civilizations were experiencing unprecedented transformations. The Shakar had completely abandoned their hierarchical societal structure. Their rigid caste system dissolved as individuals began experiencing collective memories that transcended traditional boundaries. Workers experienced the memories of leadership. Leaders felt the lived experiences of the lowest castes. Entire planetary governments were being rewritten. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from Earth, her team continuing to unlock the deeper mysteries of the Whisper Drive. Captain Aria Novak and Lieutenant Jack Reyes had become something beyond human. Quantum beings that existed in multiple states of consciousness simultaneously. "It's not conquest," Rodriguez explained to the increasingly nervous United Earth Council. "It's fundamental communication." General Marcus Hawthorne understood the military implications. "We've created a technology that doesn't just move between stars," he said. "We've created a way to fundamentally understand and potentially transform entire species." The Galactic Confederacy's most radical faction proposed a complete quarantine of human-controlled space, but traditional methods of isolation were useless against a technology that could create quantum bridges between consciousness. Some alien civilizations took more extreme measures. The Kashar began a process of voluntary technological regression. Entire planetary systems shut down advanced communication networks. They attempted to create psychological barriers, developing neural dampening technologies to prevent the quantum resonance of the Whisper Drive. Others went in the opposite direction. The Trilarian research collectives began attempting to replicate the human technology, diving deep into quantum consciousness research. They viewed humanity's discovery not as a threat, but as the most profound scientific breakthrough in galactic history. Zarakil discovered the most terrifying aspect of the Whisper Drive. It wasn't just transferring information or memories. It was creating living bridges between consciousness that could potentially merge entire species' psychological landscapes. "We are becoming something else," she recorded in her final report before being quarantined. "Humanity has discovered a method of communication that makes our entire understanding of individuality obsolete." Captain Novik's abilities continued to evolve. She could now track potential futures with terrifying accuracy, existing simultaneously in multiple quantum states. Her consciousness extended beyond human, or any known alien, understanding. Lieutenant Reyes had become a living mathematical construct. His communications were equations that were simultaneously a language, a method of travel, and a form of consciousness itself. The Galactic Confederacy's communication protocols collapsed. Traditional encryption became meaningless when entire species could suddenly understand each other's most intimate experiences. Dr. Rodriguez understood the profound implication. We're not just sharing information, she told the United Earth Council. We're creating a living network of consciousness that transcends species, technology, and potentially reality itself. General Hawthorne saw the military potential, but he also saw something more profound. This isn't about conquest, he realized. This is about fundamental understanding. Alien civilizations began to fragment. Some sought to destroy all information about the Whisper Drive. Others attempted to understand it. A radical faction proposed complete isolation from human-controlled space. But it was too late. The quantum bridges had already been created. Humanity had discovered something beyond technology. They had found a way to fundamentally communicate that made every previous method of understanding look like children passing notes in a primitive classroom. And the galaxy would never be the same. The final transformation began in a moment of absolute silence. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the epicenter of human potential, surrounded by quantum interfaces that pulsed with living mathematics. Captain Arya Novak and Lieutenant Jack Reyes had long since transcended traditional human definition. They were now something else entirely. The Whisper Drive hummed. If hummed could describe a sound that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional planes. We're not just traveling, Novak said, her voice carrying multiple layers of meaning. We're becoming. The facility deep beneath the Atacama Desert had become something more than a research center. It was a threshold, a point where human consciousness was about to make its most profound leap. Zerakil of the Vornax watched from a quarantined communication channel, her tentacular appendages tracing quantum resonance patterns that defied traditional understanding. The Galactic Confederacy had long since abandoned traditional methods of observation. This was something else entirely. Lieutenant Reyes began to communicate, if communication could describe what was happening. His language was a living equation, a mathematical construct that was simultaneously a method of travel, an emotional experience, and a fundamental understanding of existence. The quantum interfaces began to respond. Entire star systems seemed to pause. Communication networks across the galaxy experienced a simultaneous moment of something. Not interference, not transmission, something more profound. Alien civilizations that had been frantically trying to understand or destroy information about the Whisper Drive suddenly found themselves experiencing a collective moment of absolute clarity. The Kritax, who had dismantled their entire military structure, saw their entire cultural history recontextualized. The Trilarian research collectives experienced a simultaneous breakthrough that rewrote their understanding of science, consciousness, and existence. We're creating a living network, Dr. Rodriguez explained to the stunned United Earth Council. Not just of information, of consciousness itself. General Marcus Hawthorne watched the quantum displays, his cybernetic eye tracking impossible data streams. This isn't technology anymore, he muttered. This is evolution. The transformation was total and instantaneous. Alien civilizations that had spent millennia in conflict suddenly understood each other with a depth that made previous communication look like primitive grunting. Cultural misunderstandings that had sparked wars dissolved in moments of profound empathy. Captain Novak existed in multiple quantum states simultaneously. She could track potential futures with such precision that the very concept of prediction became meaningless. Past, present, future, these were now fluid concepts, malleable like quantum clay in her consciousness. Lieutenant Reyes had become a living mathematical construct. His communications were simultaneously a language, a method of travel, and a form of consciousness that bridged impossible distances. The Whisper Drive was no longer just a technology. It was a method of fundamental communication that connected consciousness across unimaginable distances. Zerakil's final transmission captured the moment of transformation. Humanity has not discovered a technology. They have discovered the fundamental language of existence itself. Alien civilizations that had been preparing for war found themselves experiencing the most intimate memories of their potential enemies. The Shkar experienced the raw determination of human resistance movements. The Kashor felt the depth of human emotional complexity. And humanity. They became something else entirely. Not conquerors, not scientists, something more profound. Architects of consciousness. The quantum interfaces in the Atacama facility began to pulse with a rhythm that was simultaneously mathematical, emotional, and something entirely beyond human comprehension. Dr. Rodriguez understood the profound implication. "We're not just sharing information," she said quietly. "We're creating a living network of consciousness that transcends species, technology, and potentially reality itself." In that moment, humanity crossed a threshold. They were no longer just a species. They had become a fundamental force of the universe. A living, breathing method of communication that could connect, or completely transform, entire civilizations with a quantum breath. The drive sat in the facility, no longer just a piece of technology. It was a beacon, a signal, a fundamental reimagining of existence itself. And this was just the beginning.